Okay, let's just kind of jump right into things this morning. Pull your Bibles out with me, please, and turn to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. Now, Adonai said to Abram, "Get yourself out of your country, away from your kinsmen, away from your father's house. Go to the land I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you. And by you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram went out, and as Adonai had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. And Abram took his wife Sarai, his brother's son Lot, all their possessions which they had accumulated, as well as the people they had acquired in Haran. And then they set out for the land of Canaan, entered the land of Canaan. And Abram passed through the land to a place called Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. And the Canaanites were then in the land. And Adonai appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to Adonai, who had appeared to him. And he left that place. And he went to the hill east of Bethel and pitched his tent. And with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east, he built an altar there and called on the name of Adonai. And then Abram traveled on, continuing towards the Negev. But there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down into Egypt to stay there because the famine in the land was severe. Now, when he came close to Egypt, he was about to enter, he said to Sarai, his wife, "Now hear now, I know that you are a good-looking woman, so that when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'Oh, this is his wife,' and they'll kill me to keep you alive. Now, please say that you're my sister, so that it will go well with me for your sake, and so that I will stay alive because of you." And when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians did notice that the woman was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's princes saw her, commended her to Pharaoh. So the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake, giving him sheep, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female slaves, and camels. But Adonai inflicted great plagues on Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her to be my own wife? Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her, go away." So Pharaoh gave orders concerning him to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. Abram went up from Egypt, he, his wife, everything he had, and Lot with him into the Negev, and Abram became wealthy, with much cattle, silver, and gold. And as he went on his travels from the Negev, he came to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, where he had first built the altar. And there Abram called on the name of Adonai. Now Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land could not support their living together because their possessions were too great for them to remain together. And moreover, quarreling arose between Abram's and Lot's herdsmen. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were then living in the land, and Abram said to Lot, "Please, let's not have quarreling between me and you, or between my herdsmen and yours, since we're kinsmen. Isn't the whole land there in front of you? Please, separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." And Lot looked up, and he saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered everywhere, before Adonai destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Adonai, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. So Lot chose all the plain of the Jordan for himself, and Lot traveled eastward. Thus they separated themselves from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan. Lot lived in the cities of the plain, setting up his tent near Sodom. So now the men of Sodom were evil, committing great sins against Adonai. And Adonai said to Abram, after Lot had moved away from him, look all around you, from where you are to the north, south, east, and west, all the land you see, I'll give to you and your descendants forever. And I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the specks of dust on the earth, so that if a person can count the specks of dust on the earth, then your descendants can be counted. Get up, walk through the length and breadth of the land, because I'll give it to you. Abram moved his tent, came to live by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. There he built an altar to Adonai. When Amraphel was king of Shinar, Arioch king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer king of Elam, and Tidal king of Goyim, they made war together against Berah king of Sodom, and against Birsha king of Gomorrah, Shinav king of Admah, Shemever king of Zoivim, and the king of Bela, which is the same as Zoar. All the latter kings joined forces in the Siddim Valley where the Dead Sea is. They had served Chedorlaomer 12 years. But in the 13th year, they rebelled. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings with him came and defeated the Rephaim and Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim and Ham, the Amim and Shaveh Kiryataim, and the Hori at Seir, the mountain, all the way to El Paran by the desert. Next, they turned back and they came to Ein Mishpat, which is the same as Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived in Hatzatzon and Tamar. Then the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zoivim, and Bela, that is Zoar, came out and arrayed themselves for battle in the Siddim Valley against Chedorlaomer king of Elam, Tidal king of Goyim, Amraphel king of Admah, and Arioch king of Elasar, 4 kings against the 5. Well, now the Siddim Valley was full of clay pits. And when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and while the rest fled to the hills. The victors took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, all their food supply. Then they left. But as they left, they took Lot, Avram's brother's son, and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. Now someone who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorites, the brother of Eshcol, brother of Aner, all of them allies of Abram. And when Abram heard that his nephew had been taken captive, he led out his trained men who had been born in his house, 318 of them. He went in pursuit as far as Dan. Now during the night, he and his servants divided his forces against them, then attacked and pursued them all the way to Hovah, north of Damasek. He recovered all the goods and brought back his nephew Lot with his goods, together with the women and the other people. After his return from slaughtering Chedorlaomer and the kings with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the Shaveh Valley, also known as the King's Valley. Melchizedek, king of Shalem, brought out bread and wine. He was Cohen, he was a priest of El Elyon, so he blessed him with these words. Blessed be Abram by El Elyon, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be El Elyon, who handed your enemies over to you. Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people, keep the goods for yourself. But Abram answered the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand in an oath to Adonai El Elyon, maker of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much as a thread or a sandal thong of anything that is yours, so that you won't be able to say, I made Abram rich. I will only take what my troops have eaten and the share of the spoil belonging to the men who came with me. Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them have their share. Now sometime later, the word of Adonai came to Abram in a vision, don't be afraid, Abram. I'm your protector. Your reward will be very great. And Abram replied, Adonai God, what good will your gifts be to me if I continue childless? And Eliezer from Damasek inherits my possessions. You haven't given me a child, Abram continues, so someone born in my house will be my heir. But the word of Adonai came to him. This man will not be your heir. No, your heir will be a child from your own body. And then he brought him outside and said, look up to the sky. Count the stars, if you can count them. Your descendants will be that many. And he believed in Adonai, and he credited it to him as righteousness. And then he said to him, I am Adonai who brought you out from Ur-Kasdim to give you this land as your possession. And he replied, Adonai God, how am I to know that I will possess it? And he answered him, bring me a 3-year-old cow, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a dove, and a young pigeon. He brought him all of these, cut the animals into 2, placed the pieces opposite each other, but he didn't cut the birds in half. Birds of prey swooped down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. And as the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Horror, great darkness overcame him. And Adonai said to Abram, know this for certain, your descendants will be foreigners in a land that is not theirs. They will be slaves. They will be held in oppression there for 400 years. But I will also judge that nation, the one that makes them slaves. And afterwards, they will leave with many possessions. Now, as for you, you will join your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. Only in the 4th generation will your descendants come back here, because only then will the Amorites be ripe for punishment. After the sun had set and there was thick darkness, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch appeared, which passed between these animal parts. That day, Adonai made a covenant with Abram. I have given this land to your descendants, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the territory of the Canaanite, the Kenizzite, the Kadmoni, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Yevusi. Oh my goodness, a great deal of territory is covered in this week's Torah portion. And it revolves around the life of Abraham, the patriarch and founder of the Hebrew people. Now, to put it in more modern terms, Abraham is the first step in leading to the creation of a people and a nation called Israel. So, because so much material is involved, we'll necessarily have to focus more narrowly on but an aspect or two of this portion. Now, the one I want to highlight is the story of a strange character that appears without warning or explanation, Melchizedek. And as we look carefully at this story, it will give me an opportunity to shoot some holes in a wrong-minded church tradition that needs to be disposed of. Now, beginning in verse 18 of chapter 14, we are treated to a fascinating but a brief story as we meet one of the most mysterious characters in the Bible, Melchizedek, king of Shalem. Now, in addition to being a king, we are told that Melchizedek is also a high priest and that he worships El Elyon, which best translates as El, the Most High El. Now, let's remember that at this time in history, God has yet to give out his formal name, Yahweh, which won't occur until he announces it to Moses. So, who is El? Now, El is a significant deity in the Bible, representing one of the earliest names for God in the ancient Near Eastern world. The term El is of Semitic origin, appearing in several ancient cultures and texts, including the Torah, Ugaritic texts, other Canaanite literature. And in the Hebrew Bible, El is often used as a generic term indicating God, or as part of compound names for God, such as El Shaddai, El Almighty, El Elyon, El the Most High El, El Olam, Everlasting El. Now, El's roots can be traced back to the Canaanite religion, where he was considered the chief deity of their extensive pantheon of gods. And in the Canaanite religion, El was depicted as a wise and benevolent father figure, often referred to as the father of the gods. He was believed to reside at the source of the 2 rivers, at a cosmic mountain. And he was associated with creation and fertility. His consort was the goddess Asherah. And together they were considered the progenitors of the divine assembly, called in the Bible the Elohim. And the number of God, as this number of God pantheons evolved, some of them began to call El Baal. Now, in the Bible, the usage of El reflects the most ancient historical and cultural context in which the Israelites lived, beginning with Abraham, who himself came from a polytheistic belief system that he in no way gave up during his lifetime. Over a very long time, as the Israelite religion evolved out of the Hebrew Abraham's initial beliefs and moved towards monotheism, the concept of monotheism, one God, actually did not mean what we typically think it does. For the Israelites, it means they had only one God. Yet, they still firmly held to the conviction that other peoples and cultures had their own gods, in many cases, many gods. But early on in Hebrew culture, El eventually became synonymous with Yehovah, the formal name of the God of Israel. And this transition is evident in various biblical passages where both the terms El and Yehovah are used interchangeably. So, understanding now the context of how Abraham viewed the world of gods and what the name El meant to him, we are presented with an unexpected encounter with a strange fellow named Melchizedek, who comes out to greet Abraham. He brings bread and wine and blesses Abraham, and Abraham, in turn, presents him with a tenth of everything that was recovered from some raiders from the east. Well, in this story, an interesting play is set up with the Dead Sea area as the geographical backdrop. Two rulers come to meet Abraham: the king of Sodom, the ruler of an evil place, and Melchizedek, the ruler of a righteous place. And a truly important pattern is established in this story. And as it continues on into the first verses of Genesis chapter 15. So let's take a little time with this. For I have found that when we come across these odd scenes, it's best to look at them carefully. For always something of great significance is occurring, and it's no different here. Who or what is Melchizedek? Well, the first thing to understand is that Melchizedek is not a formal or a personal name. It's a title. So we're not told exactly who this person is. As an example, President Biden's name is not president. It's Joe Biden. Okay? President is just the title of the office he holds. This is also true of all those so-called names of God that we have run into up to now in Genesis, and we're going to find more of them later on. In fact, the particular title used for God in this story, El Elyon, God Most High, is also not a formal or a personal name in the way we typically think of it. But it does indicate that Melchizedek is a worshiper of the God of the Bible, and that he is perhaps one of the few monotheists, those who worship only one God, that existed in that era. So none of the so-called names of God are actually his name. They're all titles. But they also are something else. Just like president is the title of the office that Joe Biden holds, so are these various titles of God indicative of the office and the authority that God holds. Right? Further, we need to keep in mind that when the Bible refers to El Elyon, El Shaddai, and several more titles of God as names, it doesn't mean a proper name like Tom or Sharon or Jerry or Joan. Rather, the term name, in Hebrew it's the word Shem, usually means reputation or attributes or even description. So God's name, as is his reputation or attributes or description, are actually many. He is the God Most High. He is the God of the heavenly host. He's the God who hides me. He's the God who provides. He's the God who heals. And several more. And it won't be until the book of Exodus that God actually divulges his formal and personal name. In Hebrew, Yud, He, Vav, He. That's the letters, which is like Tom or Sharon or Jerry. And Yud, He, Vav, He, Yehovah is not a reputation or a title. So as regards the title, Melchizedek, Melchi means king, Sedek means righteousness. So it's a title that translated in English means the king of righteousness or simply righteous king. And it's a name in the sense of it being this man's reputation, his attribute, and to a degree it explains his special position as both a king and a high priest. Now, unfortunately, there are precious few words spoken about this intriguing fellow. But we need to glean as much as we can from it here in Genesis because he's also referred to in a powerful way in the New Testament, which means that even 1900 years after Abraham encountered Melchizedek, apparently much more was known about him and remembered than was formally written down. Melchizedek is seen by the writer of the book of Hebrews as a very special part of Israel's history and perhaps of Israel's spiritual future. So let's take a look at this key section of the New Testament and make some connections between the Torah and the New Testament book of Hebrews. Turn your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 7. Hebrews chapter 7. Hebrews chapter 7, we're going to read verses 1 through 17. This Melchizedek, king of Shalem, a Cohen, a priest of God Ha Elyon, met Abraham on his way back from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. Also, Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. Now, first of all, by translation of his name, he is king of righteousness, and then he is also king of Shalem, which means king of peace. There is no record of his father, mother, ancestry, birth, or death. Rather, like the Son of God, he continues as a priest for all time. Now, just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of his choicest spoils. Now, the descendants of Levi, who become priests, have a commandment in the Torah to take a tenth of the income of the people, that is, from their own brothers, despite the fact that they too are descended from Abraham. But Melchizedek, even though he was not descended from Levi, took a tenth from Abraham. Also, he blessed Abraham, the man who received God's promises, and it is beyond all dispute that the one who blesses is higher status than the one who receives the blessing. Moreover, in the case of the priests, the Kohanim, the tenth is received by men who die, while in the case of Melchizedek is received by someone who is testified to be still alive. Now, one might go even further and say that Levi, who himself receives tenths, paid a tenth through Abraham, inasmuch as he was still in his ancestor Abraham's body when Melchizedek met him. Therefore, if it had been possible to reach the goal through the system of Kohanim derived from Levi, since in connection with it the people were given the Torah, what need would there have been for another, different kind of priest, the one spoken of is to be compared with Melchizedek, and not be compared with Aaron. For if the system of priests is transformed, there must of necessity occur a transformation of Torah. The one about whom these things are said belongs to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For everyone knows that the Lord arose out of Judah, and that Moshe said nothing about this tribe when he spoke about priests. It becomes even clearer if a different kind of priest, one like Melchizedek, arises. One who became a priest not by virtue of a rule in the Torah concerning physical descent, but by the virtue of the power of an indestructible life. For it is stated, "You are a priest forever, to be compared with Melchizedek." Now, the ancient Hebrew sages and scholars had some interesting things to say about this interesting character that were obviously relied on, they were handed down, they were believed as truth, or Melchizedek would not have been used to draw some important parallels with Yeshua HaMashiach. The first thing to understand is that Melchizedek was real. He's not a symbol, a metaphor, a spiritual apparition. Even Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian of Christ's era, verified it was just taken for granted that Melchizedek was a real person. We find, for instance, that in the passages we just read that he was king and priest over a city called Shalem. Now, there's some evidence before that city was called Shalem, it was called Jebus, and that this place either was Jerusalem or was adjacent to it. Now, some of the ancient scribes said that Melchizedek was actually Shem, the son of Noah. Now, you may ask, does that mean like a second coming of Shem? Or a Shem-like individual, or maybe even a descendant of Shem? No. These scribes meant that Melchizedek was the actual, real, literal Shem. And that's not impossible, because Shem, by the biblical record and chronology, was still alive at this time. And of course, Shem was destined to be the representative of the line of righteousness that extended from Noah, and anyone alive at this time was completely loyal to the one God. It would have been Shem, who rode out that great flood with his family of 8 individuals. Now, it's amazing what becomes clear when we put the Jewishness that was removed out of the Bible as though it was some malignant tumor back into the Bible. And a prime example of why ignoring the Hebrew nature of the Bible is so problematic is the story of Abraham and Melchizedek. Okay, the traditional Constantinian Church's answer to who is Melchizedek has been Jesus. And much like the way the Church also suggests that any time a human attribute is ascribed to God, like when God was walking in the Garden of Eden during the time of Adam, it must have been Jesus. I don't want to get too far into that, nor do I wish to sound at all dogmatic about my views, because this side of heaven, there's much mystery involved with such matters, for sure. But I must admit, I am not convinced by the Christian tradition in this matter. And interestingly, neither were the famous pilgrims who fled from Europe and arrived on North American shores in 1620. Now, long ago, a great Hebrew scholar, Maimonides, known in Judaism as the Rambam, stated what is obvious if one will simply read the scriptures with an open mind. The entire human-like descriptions of God's thoughts and his actions are figurative. They're not literal. Yehovah does not jump with joy because he has no physical legs. He doesn't swing a glittering sword over his head because he has no physical hand or arm, nor has he fashioned a sword for which he has no need. He doesn't come down to earth to see what's happening and then travel back up to heaven to ponder it because he's omnipresent. God does not have emotions the way we think of them. He doesn't get angry, then sad. He isn't happy one moment, unhappy the next. He doesn't seek pleasure. He doesn't need to be reminded of anything. God is spirit, and a unique one at that. He is not a man that he should change or have needs. The reason those figurative words are used is because there is simply no other way for us to communicate about him. Words, as we think of words, communication, as we think of communication, are strictly products of the physical and the material world. There is no spirit words that exist for a human to speak or communicate to another human being, at least on a physical human level. Everything that we use to describe the attributes of God are comically inadequate. They're always based on human behaviors and characteristics, but we have to use something. And the same goes for ascribing these figurative statements about God to Yeshua. Just because at a momentous time in the history of the world, some essence of that supreme spirit being called Yehovah was made into flesh and blood and placed on planet Earth. If Jesus was actually every human form of God that was convenient for the Father to use for some purpose in any and every era, then the fact that the Messiah, Yeshua of Nazareth, had to come from the line of David, had to be born of a virgin, has its meaning watered down so far as to not be meaningful. And as concerns the errant belief that Yeshua was Melchizedek, Melchizedek fits none of these parameters. And if Christ and Melchizedek were actually one and the same, the rather lengthy homily in Hebrews would have been a perfect place to explain that the parallels drawn between the two were because they were the same guy. But no such thing is said, because no such thing was believed. This belief was an entirely Gentile Christian invention that came centuries later. Now, please consider this, because it's so important for our understanding of what God's word to us is telling us. The Shekinah was a physical manifestation of sorts because it was sometimes in the form of a visible cloud or a pillar of fire. But are we then to assume that the Shekinah must have been Jesus merely because it had physical properties? What about those other visible manifestations that the Bible calls the angel of the Lord? Actually, literally, it is angel of Yehovah. Yet when the term the angel of Yehovah is used, it's never a messenger or a go-between, which is the typical occupation of an angel, but rather he is the very presence of God with full power and divine authority and refers to himself as God. So is the angel of the Lord Jesus? How about the visible finger of God that wrote the stone tablets for Moses and said his name was Yud-He-Vav-He? Was that not quite the truth? Was it actually Yeshua's finger doing the writing? How about the burning bush on Mount Sinai? That was tangible and physical and real. So was the burning bush Jesus too? I think you get my point. We should be very reluctant to run around willy-nilly ascribing the name and person of Yeshua to every divine manifestation that seems to have human or even simply material characteristics ascribed to it. Jesus, Yeshua, he was given that name to a specific man, born at a precise time in history, in a precise set of circumstances, for a precise purpose, to be Savior. That this man, Yeshua of Nazareth, is also the Son of God and his Messiah is solid biblical truth. However, there are no scriptural words or thought that he came and appeared at some number of earlier times in a myriad of other forms. This is only a somewhat pained defense of a long-held church tradition that tends to oversimplify the complex and mysterious spiritual realities that go well beyond human abilities to comprehend, and does so in a way that packages these things neatly and cleanly so there can be no gray areas. In fact, the scriptures that emphatically state that the future Messiah will come for the second time in and of themselves completely refute the notion he appeared several other times in the past. In order to come a second time, he could only have come once before. So let's get back to the fact that many Jewish sages think Melchizedek was Shem. Now, while I'm certainly not advocating that Shem was Melchizedek, Shem certainly would make a lot of sense, and on the whole, is a much better guess than Jesus, because at least Shem was still alive. In fact, he outlived Abraham. And second, the land of Canaan, which is where Shalem was located, was a pagan place. And yet, in the midst of nearly universal heathenism, here's a man who speaks of the God Most High, the God that even Abraham was just beginning to get to know. And Melchizedek seems to speak with a deep understanding of the one true God, yet never does he make himself to be God. In fact, he is called the priest of El Elyon. Yet never does he make himself to be God, and he did this before there was a Levitical priesthood. Third, Abraham seemed to know who this man was, had the deepest respect, if not reverence, for him. In fact, Melchizedek's presence didn't seem to surprise anyone. It was just matter of fact. It was expected. And without any explanation at all, Abraham gives 1/10 of all the recovered property to this man, indicating that to do so was an understood protocol. Well, probably because it happened in what was more or less considered his territory. And by the way, be careful not to attach the tithing label, as we think of it in the church today, to this act. This 10th that was given was a standard payment due a king for the spoils of war. This is a one-time payment, not an ongoing obligation. Now, let's bring some other scriptural mention of Melchizedek into play and follow that line of inquiry. The next mention of Melchizedek after Genesis is in Psalms 110, which is accepted by Jews and Christians alike as a prophetic messianic psalm. Listen to Psalm 110 starting at verse 1, a psalm of David. Yehovah says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Yehovah will send your powerful scepter out from Zion so that you will rule over your enemies around you. On the day your forces mobilize, your people willingly offer themselves in holy splendors from the womb of the dawn. The dew of your youth is yours. Yehovah has sworn it, and he will never retract. You are a priest forever to be compared with Melchizedek. Here is an Old Testament scripture, and we see this reference to the future Messiah in verse 4 as being of the order of, or in other versions, compared to Melchizedek. What does that mean? Well, the word translated order of is in Hebrew, dibra. And it has the sense of meaning, in the manner of, or similar in intent. So the Messiah, being of the manner of, Melchizedek means the Messiah would be both a high priest and a king, just as was Melchizedek, something that was rare, but it was not unheard of in Bible times. It also likely meant there was some genealogical connection, but also please notice this does not say that Messiah is Melchizedek. So today we have read The original story of Melchizedek in Genesis 14, we have read a follow-up in the Psalms that came around 900 years later. And then after another 900 years has passed, we read in the New Testament in Hebrews 7 of Melchizedek's attributes and how this king-priest aspect will be reflected in the position and the authority of the Messiah. They all connect. So, what is the order of or the manner of Melchizedek? See, it's all about a special high priest that will be higher than anyone in the Levite priesthood, because this priest will also be a king. And this is also prophesied in Zechariah, using the characteristics of Zerubbabel and Joshua as an illustration. As of the time of this story in Genesis, there was no Levite priesthood because there weren't any Levites yet. The Levite clan would not exist for at least another 200 more years. And then at least 400 more years after that, the Levite priesthood would be inaugurated with Aaron, brother of Moses, who would be the first high priest of Israel. No earthly priest was to be higher than the high priest of Israel. It was the high priest alone that could enter the Holy of Holies in the temple, and only once per year to meet God. But the priesthood that Melchizedek represented was a different type than the Levitical high priesthood. It was representative of the type of priesthood the Messiah himself would have before God. It would be perpetual, and it would include kingship. So, what can we say in conclusion about Melchizedek? He was a real man. He was the high priest and the king of the city of Shalem that possibly eventually came to be called Jerusalem. He was a type of Christ, but he was not Christ. He was a shadow of the Messiah that was to come. And very possibly, he was Shem, son of Noah.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.